You can draw this in Procreate. You can draw this in Procreate by just using the brushes that are already in Procreate and by following every step in this video. If you follow this video all the way till the end, then you can share your work on Instagram, tag me in the image, and maybe you will see your artwork in the next You Can Draw This video. I want to get started right away, but first let's talk about the canvas. It is 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels. If you want to use the same brush sizes as I'm using, then do be sure to make your canvas the same size as I'm using. And as always, I have created a color palette, which you can download through the link in the description. Alright, let's fill our background with a color first. Go to the color palette and click background color. And we will use this first color in the color palette. And next we will create a circle for our landscape. We will do this on layer 1. And we will use the second color in the color palette. And for our brush, we will use the monoline brush, which you can find under calligraphy. I have the brush set to 20%, but for this step, it doesn't really matter how big your brush is. It's what you do with it that matters. Let's draw a circle. Hold your pen in place to make it snap to a circle, and then hold one finger on your screen to make it snap to a perfectly round circle. And what we'll do now is we are going to make sure that our circle is in the center of our canvas. We can go to the arrow right here and then click Fit to Screen. Now we are sure that our circle is entirely centered because it is fit to the screen. Now if you use two fingers, you can squeeze a little bit and make it a bit smaller. But since we have magnetics turned on, it'll stay in the center. As long as you don't make any big movements. Of course you could move it around, but if you're just gently squeezing, it'll stay centered. Now let's go back to our brush. We will want to fill this shape. You can do that by just dragging the color onto your circle and fill it with this color. Next we will make a second circle. Go to the layer palette again and we will duplicate this circle. Just swipe to the left and click duplicate. Now we want to give this circle a different color. We can do that by turning on alpha lock on this layer. Click the layer, select alpha lock, and now switch to this third color in the color palette and drag it onto your circle. I want to make this second circle a little bit smaller than our first circle. So let's go back to the arrow and again give it a gentle pinch to make it a bit smaller, but do make sure that you have magnetics turned on. Like that. Since I want to add a drop shadow at a later stage, I feel like our circles are a little bit too big, so I want to make them both just a little bit smaller. Now to make both circles smaller at the same time, you will need to select them both. So if you have one layer selected, you can just swipe to the right on the other to select them both. And if you go to the arrow now, you can make both layers smaller. So we'll pinch again. Making them just a little bit smaller. Now let's get started on our landscape. We want our landscape to just show up on that orange circle. That line around it, we want that to stay intact. We don't want to paint on that. So what we'll do is make a new layer in our layer palette. So click the plus and use layer clipping mask here. That way, whatever we paint on layer 3 will only show up on this, second layer 1, that orange circle. First thing we'll do is create some mountains. For the color, we will use this color right here. It's a brown color. And we'll make a horizontal line across our circle just below the halfway point. If you hold your pen in place, it'll snap to a perfect line. And if you hold your finger in place, if you hold your finger on the screen, it'll snap to a perfect horizontal line. And now let's make a mountain-like hilly mountain shape. You can just make some wobbly lines going up and down. We'll go a bit down here near the center. And back up again. About here, but of course you can create your own mountain design. Do make sure that you close your shape near that horizon and then fill it by dragging in the color. Now let's create some more mountains behind these. We'll do that on a new layer, so click the plus in the layer palette and drag this layer underneath layer 3. That way these mountains will show up behind the mountains that we have just created. We will pick a darker color. We will pick this color in the color palette. And we will make some more mountain shapes, but do be sure to close each shape. Just go up a little bit here. Circle around to close your shape. And just make some wobbly lines. Every time, close that shape. And we'll make some here. And now you can drag in the color circle to fill these shapes. And for our next step, we will draw a sun. And we want the sun to be behind these mountains. So the layer on which we will draw the sun needs to be below these mountain layers. So click the plus and then be sure to drag it under those mountains that we just made. For our color, we'll switch to this bright yellow sunny color. And we are still using the monoline brush. Now draw a circle. Hold your pen in place and then tap one finger on your screen to make it snap to a perfect circle. And now drag in the color to fill that circle. And you can use the arrow to move your sun around until it is placed right where you want it. Of course, we don't want our sun to stick out here at the bottom. So let's make a selection by going to that S-shaped ribbon. Click rectangle and then just make a selection of that bottom part. Now, if you swipe with 3 fingers on your screen, you can clear that selection. And now I would like to create a glow around that sun. We'll duplicate the layer with the sun on it. So swipe to the left on the layer and then click duplicate and go back to that bottom layer. Now go to the magic wand and select Gaussian blur. Now if you swipe to the right on your screen with your pen or your finger, you will increase the blur. I think we can go for somewhere around 20%. And of course, again, we don't want that glow to show up underneath those mountains. So you can go back to the selection tool, use the rectangle again, and swipe with 3 fingers to clear that selection. Next, let's add some clouds to our scene. We'll do that on a new layer. You can just go on top of the others, click the plus, and use layer clipping mask again. So whatever we paint will only show up on that orange circle. For our color, we will pick this first color, the one that we also used for our background. And still using the monoline brush. And now let's make some simplified cartoon-like clouds. I will start with a horizontal line and then just draw some wobbles on top. Some bigger and some smaller wobbles. And do make sure that you close the shape so you can fill it by dragging in the color. And let's draw another cloud here. I'll start with a horizontal line again. And I'll draw some wobbles on top. And I'll drag in the color to fill the shape. And let's add another one right here near the edge. And never forget to close your shape before filling it. Next, I would like to add a gradient to the sky. So let's go to our layer palette and go to that orange circle. We already have alpha lock turned on, which is great because we only want to paint on the pixels, on the paint that is already on the layer. For our brush, we will switch to the soft brush, which you can find under airbrushing. I will set the brush to around 13% and the opacity is set to 40%. And let's pick this dark red color. We will make some horizontal strokes right at the top of our sky, darkening that part up because we're looking at a sunrise here. So that top is a bit darker, and let's do the same for the bottom of our screen, the bottom of our landscape. Just make horizontal strokes. And let's also switch to this middle color right here. We'll put some of that in the middle and right here as well. Maybe just a little bit more of that dark red. That looks nice. And now to soften this transition, we can go to the magic wand and use Gaussian blur. Swipe your pen to the right and give it a soft blur. Let's say around 17%. And now let's add some little birds to the sky. We'll make a new layer on top of all the others. So click the plus while you have the top layer selected. And you don't really have to use layer clipping mask here because, well, those birds will be in the center of our landscape, so there isn't any chance that we will go outside of the circle. Let's grab the monoline brush again under calligraphy. And let's pick this dark color. And let's make the brush a little bit smaller. Let's go for around 8%. And we'll make these V shapes for our birds. We're making it very simple. Just make some random birds. And I'll thicken that center a little bit because, well, that's where the body of the bird is. And I'll make some smaller and some bigger birds. Now, of course, we'll want to create a reflection in the water right here. And to do that, we will need to duplicate all these layers, which will be reflected on the water. Now, you could duplicate each layer one by one, or if you're happy with how your painting is looking, you can just merge all these layers. So let's do that by squeezing them all together. And now we can duplicate this merged layer. So swipe to the left and select duplicate. Now let's pick this bottom layer and go to the move tool. That's the arrow right here. And then select flip vertical to have a flipped version of our landscape. Make sure that you still have magnetics turned on so it's easier to drag your layer straight down. And let's go to about here. Now I'd like to lower the opacity of the layer. So click the N and let's drag it to, well, let's go for 30%. And finally, let's add a slight blur to this layer. We'll do that by going to the magic wand, the adjustments menu, and then select motion blur. Now again, drag your pen to the right to create a slight blur on the water. And click the magic wand again, or click your brush, whatever, to get out of that menu. As a final touch, I would like to add a drop shadow to our circle landscape. We'll go to that bottom circle layer, swipe to the left and duplicate this layer. Now go to the bottom layer and fill this with the dark color that we just used for our birds. Drag it onto the circle, and now in your layer palette you can see that this circle is dark right now. Next we'll apply a Gaussian blur to this layer. So go to the adjustments, that's the magic wand, go for Gaussian blur, and let's go to around 13%. And now let's go to the move tool, that's that arrow, and drag this layer down a little bit. Click the arrow again to get out of that menu. And let's zoom out a little bit. Now the shadow is a bit dark, so we can go to the layer, click the N, and turn down the opacity to around 50%. And there we have our sunrise landscape. I hope you have enjoyed following this tutorial. If you did, then you might like my other You Can Draw This videos as well. So be sure to check them out. Or just get started with these two videos over here. I will see you next time.